Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's program, Modernizing the Citizen Experience. I'm Amir Mitchell with GovExec, and I'll be your host. The latest Citizen Experience Executive Order has underscored the need for agencies to modernize their technologies and processes to best meet the ever-evolving needs of their customers. With this in mind, state and federal organizations are turning to AI and cloud-based solutions while integrating emerging technologies into legacy systems. Joining me today to kick off this program and discuss how to achieve a better experience for employees and citizens alike is the Chief Deputy State CIO of North Carolina, Susan Kellogg. Susan, thank you for taking the time to chat with me today. I look forward to a great discussion.
Amir, thank you for having me. Welcome, everybody, and love the topic. So one I'm very excited to talk about.
Awesome. Susan, to start, can you give me a brief background on what you do as the Chief Deputy State CIO of North Carolina?
Absolutely. So I run internal operations for the DIT organization within North Carolina. And that is strategy, governance to operations. And we provide services to our agencies and local governments as well across the state. But we're also looking at what is the IT strategy, how can we unify the government experience, technology use across all of the state.
Important work.
Mm-hmm.
Susan, the topic for today is modernizing the citizen experience. Generally, what does that mean to you, and why is it important for state and local governments?
So it's terribly important. The citizens' expectations around government services have fundamentally changed. They expect a quick, intuitive, and seamless experience now. During the pandemic, we learned a lot about our citizens, and quite frankly, all of us prior to the pandemic thought we were using technology quite a lot, even those in technology fields. And then afterwards, we learned new ways of working, and that has translated into what citizens expect from their government. We always talked about the consumerism in IT prior to the pandemic, but it's really prevalent because everyone is doing this now. We had to learn the hard way, but we're doing it. So the other thing is that there's this awareness that how government impacts our next door neighbors and our families, our towns. It's no longer this remote concept that we only deal with at tax time or when we renew a driver's license. It's what keeps our country going during the worst of times. And so government has this new brand of being truly critical that citizens understand in a way that they really didn't understand. I don't know that I understood before the pandemic. So when we talk about how we deliver services, state and local governments have always been focused on getting services to citizens. Post-pandemic, if I'm allowed to call this particular time post-pandemic, all facets of government really understand in a very meaningful way, a very personal way, what a poor digital experience can lead to. We know it means a family doesn't eat. Vaccines don't get to where they're needed. People don't have a bed to lay their head in at night. And those sound really big, but they are. These are the things that government delivers. And so we saw those images where things were not working and heard the stories during particularly the early days of the pandemic. So with a positive and integrated approach, we can not only get that family their unemployment money, but we can also suggest other resources that the state offers to support the family so we can get all of those resources to our citizens. And that means a lot. So it's really critical that the citizen experience is this seamless, intuitive, not a lot of work on their part, but we're getting things to the citizens and getting it to them when they need it.
For sure. And that being said, do you have any use cases where your organization has modernized a piece of technology or a process to better meet the needs of the citizens or employees you serve?
We do, and there were definitely a lot. I'm gonna go pre-pandemic, so not everything is pandemic examples. So DMV launched Pay It back in 2018 and did that with several of our DMV transactions. So license renewal, vehicle registration, and license specialty plates. That gave the state a digital wallet component that we didn't have before. And just that solution reduced call volume for users by over 800%. And this was prior to the pandemic. So since 2018, we've seen a 25% increase in online revenue collection in 2019 and 2020. And we have 8.4 million digital vehicle registrations since its launch. And more importantly, we've seen a 40% decrease in DMV wait times. So that is significant. We can get the citizens what they want and do it in a something that is easy to use for them. Another important accomplishment of that is that we included the ability to complete voter registration applications online, which is a great example of multi-agency collaboration. And again, as a citizen, you don't care. It's like, well, it's all the government. But having that cross-agency collaboration in these tools is huge because it means a single experience for the citizens. So recent service expansion included full to provisional license, voter registration updates, hearing fees, and then there's some additional specialty plate options. And so in our DIT strategic plan, it specifically calls out that we need to do more of these citizen-focused cross-agency capabilities that create that unified citizen experience.
Yeah, for sure. As a citizen, I feel waiting at the DMV in line all day is one of the things I dread personally. So it's great to hear that. Well, moving on, two resources state and local organizations are notoriously short on are time and money. How can modernizing these processes ultimately help government entities conserve these valuable resources?
And let me answer that. Well, let me go back to your example, Amir. The DMV, it's funny because that has been the way that citizens experience the government is the DMV. And as my boss likes to say, do we really want the DMV to be the welcome mat for North Carolina? And the answer in the past has been no. But the truth is that's where people that's how they come to us. That's that first point. So it does really kind of become the welcome mat, and then integrating things with that can just make it a richer experience. But yes, we're acutely aware of that. So back to your question. So two resources around how can modernizing help conserve our time and money. So our large citizen serving systems are in many different phases of modernization. And we'll go back to if you take some of our large systems, that there's a lot of integrations with federal systems and other components. So modernizing these is no small thing to do. And what we find is that you have more of an antiquated type system, might even have what we call the old green screen. And how do you make that a fast process when someone's talking to the citizen on the other end? And robotic process automation, RPA, is an example of where it can take some of the arduous data entry, particularly when it's where you have to enter in the data on this screen, then you have to go back and you have to enter it on this screen. So it's navigating these older models for us, and it is a form of not AI specifically, but in that realm, and that helps us really integrate very quickly the newer experience with the older system. And so that's one that we have found to be specifically useful. We need to be looking at more of those where we can then integrate with that older system. Another way is that we see a fair number of things, because we were so citizen facing before. We saw a lot of things that were paper based, and there was a paper form, and so that didn't work so well when we shut down offices. And so been moving those, and there are a number of technologies and ways that we can consume those forms and move them very quickly to being online. And that, those are other, and it helps everyone, because then we're not scanning in or re-entering information, which is some of what was happening before.
Interesting. Well, Susan, looking to the future, what do you see as the next steps in this modernization process? Will there be even more AI integration? Is the shift away from legacy technology inevitable?
Well, I think the definition of legacy, yeah, I think legacy means old to some degree. I'm sure that's not the definition of it, but to quote a friend of mine, John McMillan, who's the CIO for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, when you look at application modernization, really what you're doing is data modernization at the end of the day. And will AI assist? The answer is absolutely. We're going to become, we are already very focused on data, and again, learned a lot of things during the pandemic where we could combine data sources to, say, look at fraud in the unemployment payment area, and making sure that we understood, taking data we knew about citizens and making sure we didn't have someone who had passed away, for instance, who was applying for unemployment insurance. And so data and leveraging that data for a better outcome for the state is a really critical part of it. So will AI assist in it? Absolutely, particularly where we can build take industry best practices and build those into the models. Then we're leveraging our industry partners' knowledge. So for instance, how to, when we look at the development, DevOps component of things, so looking at the back end and how do we get a lot of data, we have a lot of logs, things in a lot of moving parts, if you will. And so tracking that and saying, hey, wait a minute, something's wrong over here well in advance. That's a major a win. There does need to be a lot of good data, and then knowing what to do with it. So one thing to remember about AI is that it's learning and it's making its own decision. And we do kind of mix AI and machine learning and other things together, but for it to learn and then make a decision, based off of data and other decisions that we've made, that means the problem sets are also ones that are somewhat predictable and repeatable. So a truly unique problem set that requires strong critical thinking skills. One day, yes, I think AI is going to be there, very much a proponent for it, but today not so much. So we really have to look at what is the information that we can feed into these models, and are the kind of problems we want it to solve going to something that AI today can do, and something that can be replicated within an AI system. So lots of goodness there. Love to see that AI is making a comeback, and looking forward to see what it will do.
Well, we know that CX can be improved through changes in technology, but does the culture also play a role in bolstering the citizen experience?
Absolutely. So government has to embrace new ways of working. We need to think about the end goal first, and in very human terms. So government is fundamentally about humans of all ages and all approaches. So some of these are what we call digital immigrants, and some were born with a device in their hand. So you have to really look at that full experience. And in North Carolina, we've redesigned our citizen experience using personas to guide the design. So let me give you some examples. So you've got Jeremy Smith, our student persona. So North Carolina has some of the best universities in the country. We want to not only educate those students, but have them remain in North Carolina as productive members of our communities. funding college is hard. Finding living arrangements and transportation is really what's top of mind for students. So finding work that can help supplement Jeremy's college expenses is key. And it's key to Jeremy feeling a connection to the North Carolina community. So if we take another persona, Sam Smith, he's our retired Army veteran persona. He's retired from the Army, but he's active duty and National Guard, but he wants to start a business. So we can help Sam start that business. And find incentives. North Carolina offers to veterans to help them transition to civilian life, and include professional training and career development services. So thinking of our citizen journeys rather than we have this component, you have to get a permit over here, you have to come over here and do this, and you have to know. In the past, what we've done is required our citizens to know too much about government and how we're organized, and then they have to navigate it. We need to think of, well, what is it they're coming for, and how can we navigate it for them? So one of the things that is another, what we saw in 2020, I think U.S. Chamber of Commerce research found that 4.3 million new business applications were filed in 2020, and we all know what happened in 2020. So it was a busy year. There was a lot going on. That was a 24% increase. And then in 2021, it increased another 21%. So we have a lot of new businesses out there. Well, as a state, that's something that we want to capture and say, hey, come to North Carolina. So, in that data from the Chamber of Commerce, there's businesses, all sorts. It really was all over the map. And so what we want to do is connect them to the right processes and organizations quickly so that we can get those jobs and livelihood brought to North Carolina. So we're partnering right now with the Secretary of State's office to create a one-stop shop for creating a business. So it's a portal for creating a business that will take you to all the different things that you need to do within North Carolina, as well as all the resources that you can tap into to help you get to North Carolina. So it's a great partnership, and another example of really looking at that. Why are people coming to us? And very happy they're not coming, not just, we love our DMV, but it's another avenue. And instead of taking them through a back door, maybe like the DMV, up front and center, helping them find the things that they need. So just an example of how we're really rethinking our approach.
I love that example. I can definitely see an enhancing the citizen experience, taking that burden from the citizen and placing it on the government, which in turn will allow the citizen to really focus its time and energy on their future business.
Yep.
I think that's great. Again, moving on, how has the pandemic affected digital transformations? Has the need to go virtual made other changes come faster as well?
I think there's not a person in the world who would say the pandemic has not been a major accelerator. It has really been amazing. There were a lot of, well, should we, could we? Those questions are gone. It's when and how are we going to get there? So there's an expectation, most definitely, that citizen services are going to be available virtually as well, and without requiring an in-person experience. That is a major shift where a lot of it was, it was more making sure we had that in person. And so we've had to really rethink our approach. And so the other piece is there's still those who do want that in person. And need the in-person. And so we really have to do both. So if you think about any meetings that you're in these days, if it's all virtual or it's all in person, both of those formats are pretty easy. But if you have a hybrid experience, and so that you've got the same experience for someone who's in person versus virtual, that's very difficult. So we really have to create that seamless customer experience and recognize that we're going to have to continue to have both, but it needs to be as good an experience in either one of those. So so those are the kind of decisions that we have to explore of, do we even have hybrid? Is that a thing? And look at these service by services. Another difference now is that we, and that's government and industry alike, are acutely aware that the next pandemic, and it could be really anything, and we don't know what components it will contain, but something is around the corner. So we are currently, for instance, we're moving all of our call centers systems to the cloud. Some of those moved very quickly overnight during the pandemic to the cloud for scalability reasons. But we are making sure that all of our call centers now are being moved to cloud capabilities for the purpose of being able to scale overnight. No one wants to see citizens on the news talking about how frustrated they are for being on the phone for 10 hours and they never talk to a human being, and they're going to call again and try, tomorrow. That's not what we want to see. And while we want to move as much as possible to the digital experience, we also have to accommodate that sometimes people want to speak to a human being, or they want to walk in. And so, how are we going to integrate those pieces? So the digital transformation has many components of it. A lot of it is looking at what is that customer journey and trying to combine things so that it's not the customers having to navigate things on their own.
Well, that brings me to my next point. Things like chatbots or automated form fillings can make the citizen experience smoother. But what is the impact on the employee experience? Some people worry that automation will mean fewer jobs, but what does that really look like internally?
I haven't seen any technology innovations that have resulted in fewer jobs. Every time we innovate, we seem to need more people to do that. We're just taking those resources and using them to the highest and best use of their capability. So there are things that what we're trying to do is automate those lower end components. And it's interesting. So I'm a major proponent of artificial intelligence. In fact, my master's thesis was in AI. But we've got to understand that we actually know very little about how the brain works. So mimicking it in a system is a little harder than one might think. And there are some limitations. So when we implement AI, or in this case, you're talking about a chatbot, it's learning. And so the chatbot is consuming our knowledge base of information and coming up with an answer. And so if our knowledge base is not rich and strong, then the chatbot's not going to have a lot to work with. And so, if you think about AI, or it's more like the 5-year-old brain, not that 45-year-old brain with 25 years of experience doing whatever the topic is. I think that helps a little bit. Someone has to get that information, build those models to the tools. But once we've done that, then it's the repetitive components that can be taken care of. So there are a broad range of services and data that we leverage. And that's stuff that these capabilities, when you've got the broad swath of data, that gives you something for these models to consume and come up with conclusions that they can do much, much faster than we can. But we also have to look at it with privacy laws in place. Implicit bias can be built into the models inadvertently, but can be there. So we also take those steps very carefully. We will learn what we need to teach the models and how to be better. And this is going to increase. One of the things, and I'll tell you a couple stories. So I was looking actually at some of the DMV feedback online in various areas. And some folks are like, I just want to renew my license. I don't want to make a friend. and because the chatbot was very chatty. So they were like, can we just do what I came to do? We don't need to get that friendly. So there's also a balanced approach, because sometimes people, and again, different generations are going to want to approach things differently. And some will say when a computer knows too much about you, that's creepy, as my daughter likes to say. So when we early stage pandemic, we were testing out some chatbots around unemployment. And one of the things we typed in was, I lost my job. And the chatbot replied, that's nice. And we went, no, no. Okay, we're gonna set that aside for right now. So it's those kind of things that it takes a human to really make sure you're training it and you're getting it to the point where you have, and in some scenarios, I'll call it reputation, or the perception of citizens, even though the chatbot was trying to be very friendly, it was really the wrong answer. And we just can't take that risk. So technology can automate the non-value added task, and humans, I think, are always going to be relied on for those value added things, that really high order critical thinking. So what we want to do is leverage our humans for that and take some of the repetitive task out of it. And that's why RPA can do a lot as well. So AI should be there to enhance the work of the employee. I really don't think it's ever going to truly replace it. So I think our folks are fine. And again, every time we innovate, I can point that actually it takes better skills and not always more people, but sometimes more people to do the work. So we're safe.
Susan, well said, truly. And unfortunately, that brings us to the end of our time here.
Okay.
I want to thank you for sharing your time and expertise with us, well, with me today, Susan. We always appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Always fun topic to talk about.
Joining me now are 3 industry leaders to continue the conversation around how automation is impacting the citizen experience. We have Mike Snodgrass, an applied AI specialist with Google Cloud, Ramesh Kuvelimadam, conversational AI leader with TEKsystems Global Services, and Tim Hyde, National Account Director for SLED and HHS with TEKsystems. Thank you for taking the time, gentlemen. It's great to have you all here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, there's plenty to cover, so let's get into it. Conversational AI has evolved over time. How is it changing to help improve the citizen and employee experience? Mike, any Google specifics you would like to share?
Sure. No, thanks, Samir. Around conversational AI, I usually like to start from a Google perspective and define what is conversational AI. And really, it's the technology that allows machines to understand, process, and respond to human languages. It allows machines to talk to humans, right? Think of this as what we all know of as chatbots, virtual agents, et cetera. But it's really kind of broken down into 2 areas, right? Speech recognition and natural language understanding. And there's been a lot of advancements over the years in conversational AI to allow it to have a more positive experience for citizens and residents. So we've got much better technology to understand what people are saying from a speech perspective and translate it into text. Then once it's into text, we can kind of understand what they're saying. Hey, they're trying to say they've got a request for reporting child abuse, and they've got time in here, and this is the time frame, this is a person. Understanding that natural language is a key part of that. And then being able to respond back to the person in their own language too. The text-to-speech piece of conversational AI is very important. So there's been a lot of advancements in there. Little things like if you recognize that someone says the word bat, it could mean many different things. It could mean the flying bat, the animal, a baseball bat that you use. It could even be a verb, bat, versus a noun, bat, a bat. So all of those important parts of the technology are combined together in conversational AI to really make it a rich experience for the people that are using it. And I wanted to start with an example around consumers and how we can do this. And this is something that's live today. And you can take your phone and go to Google search, Google Maps, and you can type in something like hair salons near me. And the results that you get back for some of the businesses, there's a button that says request an appointment. And conversational AI is then used to call that hair salon, talk to the person, and schedule an appointment. And this is important when we talk about the citizen experience around this. So I wanted to play a little snippet of what an actual conversation can kind of sound like using this conversational AI.
So how can I help you? Hi, I'm calling to book a women's haircut for a client. I'm looking for something on May 3rd. Sure, give me 1 second. Sure, what time are you looking for around? At 12 p.m. We do not have a 12 p.m. available. The closest we have to that is a 1:15. Do you have anything between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m.? Depending on what service she would like. What service is she looking for? Just a woman's haircut for now. Okay, we have at 10 o'clock. 10 a.m. is fine. Okay, what's her first name? The first name is Lisa. Okay, perfect. So I will see Lisa at 10 o'clock on May 3rd. Okay, great. Thanks. Great. Have a great day. Bye.
So there's kind of a real world example from a consumer standpoint about the customer experience around conversational AI. And the important takeaway here is that the technology is advancing so that the customer experience is much better. So while that was a consumer example, this can also be applied to government agencies to help solve for some of the problems. And we've got some examples of how that'll be used. But that's just a little illustrative example of conversational AI and the advances and how that's helpful.
Thank you, Mike. It was a great example. Ramesh, let's start with you. You've done some work around value-based streams here. What has that been like?
Well, essentially, the concept of value-based streams is to try and find out how we can look at how conversational AI has evolved over time and how some of these technologies can be used to enhance the ability to converse with machines. As Mike just explained, conversational AI and the associated technologies are enabling humans to have conversations with machines in much the same manner that we do with each other. So there's an evolution in this technology that's happening. So let's look at how it has kind of evolved to help us understand how it can be useful. Today, AI applications like Mike just said can convince a person that they're not having a conversation with another human. Now, looking at that example, you couldn't tell that that was a chatbot on the other end. It's not just the human level interactions that make the conversational AI so important, but rather the ability for that AI app to make informed decisions based on actionable insights it can gather from the data. So historically, these bots have been very rule-based, just like traditional programming. If this, do this, else that. That's essentially how they work. Now, to stick with the retail example here that Mike used, if a customer is looking at a chatbot and asks for store hours, a rule can be there behind the scenes that defines store hours literally means that the customer is asking for the hours of operation of the store. And it can look up the rule and then provide a response. This is fine for simple queries. But in this case, the chatbot is not truly understanding the whole conversation. And the communication between the customer and the chatbot is kind of limited in scope. We still have a lot of these, and they do serve a useful purpose. But it's not limited to just these. It's the ability to have a complete conversation with either text or voice. It's the ability to pick up context, ask for clarifications, search for answers in knowledge bases, provide real-time translations so that you can facilitate a conversation with a customer in their own language. Now, on top of some of the technologies that Mike mentioned, there are add-on technologies as well that are able to determine the nuances of speech, human voice inflection, to describe how they're feeling and respond accordingly. Now, these chatbots can detect customer frustration, for example, by the choice of words, so that they can automatically and seamlessly route callers to a human agent without waiting to stick on a bot. The goal is to try to get to a shortest path to an acceptable resolution. And these are judgment calls that are made, and AI is getting better and better at this. Additionally, we're also seeing that we're now able to do what is called hyper-personalization. to understand, there's enough data out there that we can create hyper-personalized experiences in conversational AI, especially in the post-COVID world. There's a lot of work that is happening to enhance call centers with artificial intelligence, and AI is used to provide human agents with intelligent real-time decisioning based on the historical and behavioral data for that particular client, if that client's called in the past. So now you're able to create the next best action for that customer journey. That's from a customer side, but you can do the same thing even on the employee experience side. It can vastly improve how the employees can handle the customer calls, how they can affect the overall citizen experience. There have been studies out there that say that 95% of most customer interactions are going to start with a chatbot, at least in the next 5 years. So there's immense potential to constantly improve the citizen and employee experience with how these technologies are progressing. It's really around understanding the entire value stream of customer benefit, positive outcome, and you can see how this progression is leading us in that direction.
For sure. Thank you for that. When it comes to implementing technologies like AI and machine learning, how important is educating the workforce? Ramesh, from TEKsystems global services perspective, have you seen this as one of the key drivers?
It is. We are seeing this more and more as a key driver. You can be very sure that AI and machine learning is going to be a part of all the digital transformation journeys, and that includes government as well. But a critical part of that implementation strategy for these technologies is frequently overlooked: workforce training and education. These technologies have the ability to transform employee roles, what they require in terms of new skills and training. And as these capabilities expand, they will intrude on the borders that are tenaciously defended human professions in the past. So communication is key. When it comes to implementing these technologies like AI and machine learning, that workforce training and education becomes critical. You see, we need to address the fundamental problem that people, without that sense of achievement that they gain from doing substantive work, will feel lost and helpless. People are not machines. As part of this change, we have to address people's jobs as well as their self-worth and dignity. And I think that is a key aspect of the workforce training efforts that we need to put together. And like with any other new technologies, the better somebody understands these technologies, the better they're able to adopt and understand that these technologies are really supporting a lot of simpler, low-level, repeatable tasks. You have to reduce the fears. There's just a fair amount of misunderstandings and a lot of fear out there. And for a lot of this education to start, the government and IT leaders must include that people dimension as well. You can't just look at processes and technologies when considering innovations across these agencies. Now, leaders need to communicate across all levels, need to be making sure that people understand how their day-to-day tasks will be impacted by these new technologies. And having that workforce focus is where we are seeing as TEKsystems that makes it easy for people to adopt, makes it easy for people to see where technology can address those simpler, low-level repeatable tasks. And this is not a once and done thing either. When planning for new technologies, as change happens in government, throughout that rollout process, IT leaders must be constantly asking questions like, how can we communicate the benefit of this technology? How can we improve the customer experience, the employee experience, the citizen experience? This is not only going to help understand where these new technologies will fit, what it means for them and for their jobs, but it's also going to help speed up adoption. At the end of the day, the goal is to deliver more benefits quicker to the taxpayers, citizens, customers. But again, like everything else, change starts at the top. So the federal IT leaders will have to kind of pave the way for this. It's not going to happen if they don't see the need and understand how this is going to be beneficial. But I think we are on the right path there. If you remember, the Senate recently passed the AI Training Act to strengthen the AI knowledge and skills of federal employees. Significant step forward, but we still have to make investments, more sustained investments to promote innovation and support the upskilling, reskilling of the workforce. And the right communication needs to be in place so that the government employees can more quickly adopt AI and machine learning to deliver better services faster.
Well, that brings me to our next point. What are the benefits and risks when implementing conversational AI to affect positive citizen outcomes? Ramesh, let's start with you.
Now, let's define positive business outcomes. Now, when we say positive business outcomes, what do we really mean? We need an increase in trust in the systems and processes that are there. We need an increase in citizen satisfaction. We need more citizen engagement in the community. We need efficiency in processes. And above all, we need to lower costs. And this is a self-fulfilling cycle. Better citizen experiences with better systems will lead to citizens identifying with the community better. The more they identify with the community, there's greater community engagement. And there's greater community engagement, the more they will speak up. The more they speak up, the more the government and the political leadership will listen, and there will be action, and things will get better, and that cycle repeats. But there are risks. No matter which way you look at it, historically, we've seen that with increasing expectations, federal, state, and local governments can fail to keep up. Funding is a challenge. Funding for IT modernization can be difficult to obtain based on the political landscape in state, local governments. Now, let's assume that is addressed. There's even a bigger challenge with service integration. How do you make sure you can coordinate across silos in the agencies? That's an extremely challenging task. There are things we can do to help mitigate that risk. So obviously, just talking about risks to affect positive business outcomes doesn't make sense unless we look at how we can solve the problem, right? So there are many things that different states, local governments are doing, and countries across the world are doing as well. We have this concept called human-centered design. This is about ensuring that the changes are done from the outside in. Human-centered design is really around viewing problems from the lens of the user. This helps us develop solutions that they need, focus on things that matter, and we can focus on the improvement of processes, gaining efficiencies, lowering error rates, reducing costs, but all from the lens of what is critical and what is most important. You also have to start measuring how the customer experience is reflecting in the changes that you're making. So you need to measure. For part of the measurement process is that you need to have customer surveys, you need to have some way of finding out that information and getting that feedback from the customer. So for example, the Federal Acquisition Service at the GSA used its 2018 customer feedback survey to see how it has improved services and savings for the customers of that agency. They used some fleet category management techniques to bring down procurement time by 50%. They reduced installation time by 26%. They realized cost savings by 20%. As you can see, there are many examples out there. So better data drives better design, and better design will drive citizen satisfaction. There's also an interesting concept here around co-creation. There are other countries that have tried that, where governments invite the public to improve the services. It's not that the government just provides services to the citizens. The citizens can also provide services back to the government, that participatory government effect. So one example that jumps to mind is what happened in Portugal for participatory budgets. So the budgeting process itself has two phases. The different ideas come from the citizens. That is voted on. And then Portugal became the first nation to implement participatory budgeting at a national level. They received about 1,500 proposals, well over 600 were voted on, and a lot of them end up becoming policy. So now people are seeing that what they want is actually being affected by the government that is supporting them. One additional point here is that while we can measure, while we can do participation, we also need to standardize the data collection. There need to be some better standards in place so that we can roll up that data, aggregate it, and do some analytics so we can get some insights and better measure what we can do and do effectively.
Ramesh, thank you. Tim, I've heard a bit about Medicaid around this. Want to dive into that?
Absolutely. Yeah, so back in April, CMS sent a letter to all state Medicaid directors drastically changing the way Medicaid is to be certified or to meet certification standards of CMS. And that was to move to an outcomes-based certifications model. Previously, states had used the MECT model, where their certification from CMS, where they received their funding, was more based on technology and not based on outcomes. Because of the move to outcomes, AI and machine learning can play a very vital role in helping states to achieve that. One of the outcomes that the federal government is looking for states to be able to achieve is specifically, how does it improve efficiency, effectiveness, economics of a Medicaid program? AI and machine learning will be able to help states achieve that by several different ways, by providing the data from the different calls and interactions that the case managers have, is one way that it would be able to improve outcomes. But also by the data that will be collected from those calls will drastically be able to improve outcomes in the overall citizens experience.
Well, going off of Medicaid, how is Google solving for this within states' Department of Health and Human Services? And how can conversational AI solve for challenges specifically within public assistance programs? Mike, anything to pull here from the work with Medicaid or TANF?
Sure. This technology has been used by health and human service agencies to provide better assistance to residents, especially during COVID. So I've got some real examples here to kind of share related to health and human services. You know, a lot of times during the initial phases of COVID, everybody was calling their health department to get scheduled for a vaccine. They had a lot of questions. Am I eligible for this phase? There's a confusion in all those areas. So these virtual agents were able to answer the phones, you know, chatbots on websites to go answer COVID related questions on the health side of health and human services. So a lot of, you know, kind of assistance in there within state government. Even today, these are used to answer questions around vital records from a health perspective. If I need to request my birth certificate, I can speak to a virtual agent, get all the information and get that entered into the system to get sent out, right? Lots of ways these virtual agents can kind of help out the citizens with that good experience that we saw earlier. And then now let's move into human services and Medicaid, TANF, even things on the child abuse side, right? We've got real examples of agencies with complaints that people said, I had to wait 30 minutes to talk to somebody when I was calling to report child abuse, right? So a real, you know, human services example that we want to fix, right? We don't want to have to wait on hold to report something important, right? Leverage a virtual agent to kind of gather that information or get that call to the top of the queue to talk to a person. But then there's been a lot of frequently asked questions around Medicaid, SNAP, TANF, et cetera. You know, do I even apply for SNAP? How do I apply for Medicaid? What's the status of my application? I applied weeks ago. I haven't heard anything. So really good examples of health and human services of being able to use these virtual agents, talk to the residents, gather their information. The virtual agents are advanced now. They can reach into the systems. We've got some live examples where they even reach into mainframes to look up the status of an application and respond back to a person with that, right? Automate all that, use conversational AI to get a good experience for the person, relieve the call center so you don't have to hire so many people to answer these. Use the virtual agents to answer these kind of simple yet very important questions about what's the status of my application for SNAP. So those are just a couple examples around health and human services.
Thank you. In the current market, most states are struggling with attracting and retaining caseworkers for public assistance programs. How can AI help with this challenge? Tim, let's have you take this one.
Yeah, as I travel around to different states and meet with, you know, not only state CIOs, but HHS CIOs, it is very evident that states are struggling right now with hiring and retaining caseworkers. There's a large southern state that came to TEKsystems recently and asked us to try to help them fill 1,000 open case manager positions. These were not new positions. These were existing positions that they had open. AI and machine learning, you know, as Mike was just talking about, can help take on a lot of roles for those caseworkers in lieu of as an alternative to trying to hire all of those people, right? I dare say probably 50% of all the questions or people trying to get in touch with someone from their public assistance office are 50% of those questions are all the same exact question. And by automating that process and putting an AI bots to be able to answer those questions will allow a reduction in the need for caseworkers and will ultimately allow states to be much more efficient and help solve that problem.
Thank you. We've talked about how AI can transform not only employee, but also citizen experience. Is there an example where you have used technology to modernize a piece of technology or a process to better meet the needs of the citizens or employees you serve? Mike, I think you saw something out of Illinois, correct?
That's right. The state of Illinois used this technology and they published a lot of the metrics, and it's a really good example of the benefits and how it can help. And so this is a public case study that you can look for. It's the Illinois Department of Employment Security. So it's really kind of their Department of Labor. And the situation that Illinois was in is this was during COVID when everybody was filing for unemployment because they had to shut down a lot of the businesses. So they deployed this conversational AI in their contact center to help the over 1 million citizens who were, trying to file and check the status of their unemployment claims. And we've got some stats on this. This is really interesting. Between March 1 and May 9th of 2020, there were over 1 million unemployment claims. And that was 11.5 times as many claims as the same period the year before. So massive amount of unemployment claims during the initial part of COVID. We all lived through that. We kind of saw that. So what did this mean for the State Department, right? For the Illinois Department of Employment Security, they're the ones that manage these unemployment benefits, right? So everybody was calling in, everybody was doing web inquiries. What's the status of my claim, et cetera. And the offices were closed, right? You couldn't go in and go talk to somebody. So the only way you could contact was through the phone and through the web. So they leveraged these virtual agents to kind of help in those situations. And then they published some stats about how they're being used. So these virtual agents in Illinois were able to handle over 140,000 phone calls and web inquiries per day. And then afterwards, at the after hours when the call center was closed, there were people to kind of answer, put the virtual agents on the phone to at least get some questions answered 24/7. So after hours, these agents were answering 40,000 calls per night in multiple languages. I believe they've added some multiple languages to this, since the publishing of the case study. So now turn that into the cost savings, right? There's one aspect of it, now I can call the call center at 3 a.m. if I happen to be up and check the status of my application, right? It's a better benefit to service to the citizens, but it's a cost savings to the state too. The virtual agents are, I think they published some stats on this. Maybe they're 6 or 7 cents per call for a virtual agent to answer it versus I think $2.80 or something like that for a person to answer it. So the more calls I can get answered by a virtual agent, the more money I can save. Now, when you add this up with all of these calls coming in, the state of Illinois recognized about $100 million in savings by leveraging the virtual agents. They didn't have to hire the people to kind of answer the phone calls. They could leverage the much cheaper virtual agents. So I wanted to kind of share those metrics from Illinois because it was a really good example of how they can be used in the real world.
I think so. Are there any cooperative or purchasing agreements that state and local or higher education can utilize to purchase TEKsystems global services implementation in a more effective manner? Tim, outside of RFP process, what other options do state and local governments have to partner with TEKsystems?
Yeah, we've got several different contract vehicles that if states or local governments are interested in partnering with TEKsystems, that they could utilize. In several states, we actually have IT services-based contracts that can be leveraged. But for states that we don't have direct contracts, there's 2 contracts that we could work off. One of them is Texas DBITS contracts. All states can purchase off of that. And another one is the NASPO contract. We have a partnership with Carasoft, which would allow states to be able to purchase off those cooperative purchasing agreements.
Tim, thank you. Unfortunately, it is time to wrap up this program, but thank you to our expert panelists for sharing their expertise with us today. It was a fantastic discussion. Here at the end of our program, I want to take this opportunity to thank Susan Kellogg again for her participation. I also want to thank our event sponsors, TEKsystems and Google Cloud, for bringing us together. Lastly, thank you, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you again next time. For GovExec, I'm Amir Mitchell. Have a great afternoon, everyone.